requested that you zoom the camera out just a little bit to get you both in the frame. And a tad more, Mike. And one final adjustment, please, Mike. A little more out and slightly down. And Mike, thank you for that positioning. That's a great picture. Alpha, this is Houston on Space to Ground 2. Are you ready for the event?
Houston, Alpha, we're ready for the event.
Thank you. NASAExplorers.com. This is Houston. Please call Alpha for a voice check on Space to Ground 2.
Alpha, this is David Hitt with NASAExplorers.com. How do you hear me?
David, we hear you loud and clear. This is Mike Fold and Sasha Kaleri on board International Space Station.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. We appreciate you taking some time to answer some questions for us today. If you would, compare for me your experiences adapting to microgravity when you arrived in space this time with your experience on Mir and previous flights. Was it any easier to adjust this time because of your previous experience?
David, in general, experience does help, but I would say no great difference between this flight and previous flights. I'll let Sasha answer also.
I completely agree. The microgravity is still the same. It's microgravity. The station is a bit different, but you can adjust to it very quickly.
Thank you. Astronauts often say that the longer they spend in space, the easier it is to get around the station or the spacecraft. Are you still learning things about how to get around in microgravity, or are you pretty well comfortable at this point?
The general method of getting around in microgravity, I think, takes a number of months to work out, and I had to remember it again after a long gap from my last long-duration spaceflight on Mir. One thing in particular I have learned to do here on International Space Station that I don't remember on Mir is I use the handrails as foot rails, and not just to anchor myself as I am now so I wouldn't float away, but actually I translate using my feet, not my hands. A lot of people imagine that astronauts translate only with their hands, but once you get to know where these so-called handrails are, you actually use your feet to kind of skip from one to the next, and that's the only difference I've noticed.
Have you noticed any different physical effects from being in microgravity this flight compared to previous times? Has there been any sort of accrued effect from all the time you've spent up there?
I would only say that this time I have been using a exercise machine called the resistive exercise device, and that has certainly helped, I believe, my muscle conditioning, and I feel better for that. The other exercises are similar, and that's the only difference physically I feel.
All right. What about Flight Engineer Kaleri? Could you answer that question also, please, sir?
I believe that there are still several differences, and countermeasures means are different. Well, we have a wheel ergometer and the treadmill, which are similar to the previous ones, but they're not the same. I believe that our return back to Earth will show if I was right in my assumptions. Currently, I believe that we still need to learn to use the countermeasures devices especially with the TVs, the treadmill, better. Probably we are not still understanding everything.
Thank you. Do you have any concerns about the long-term physical effects from your spaceflight exposure?
Yes, I think we're all aware of some of the medical degradations that occur and the bone loss we've heard about, and we know radiation in general, if there's a lot of it, can be bad. So you think about that, you're aware of it. We are taking the countermeasures that have already been talked about, and to a great extent, I think those countermeasures work. I am aware of how I felt after Mir, my last long-duration spaceflight, and I will attempt, and I am attempting right now, to try and combat those effects ahead of time. There are certain exercises I'm doing now that I didn't do the last time because I was aware of how my neck hurt, for example, in 1G when I came back. So I expect it to be better this time. But overall, yes, you're concerned about them. It's not something that stops you doing this great adventure, though.
Flight Engineer Kaleri, could you tell me a little bit about your experiences readjusting to being back on Earth after your previous flights?
There are several rules here. First rule is do not hustle, just listen to your body, and especially in the first few hours and even days after landing, you have to be extremely egoistic, so to speak. You have to be self-concerned and follow all your body cues. You have to understand that there are so many medical specialists and others who would love to study us and research, and I'm just myself. I'm one, and it is very important to listen to your body and satisfy its demands and needs. The adaptation on Earth usually takes several stages, especially with me. There are first few hours when I do not want to drink or eat anything. Then there's a second stage where actually you're having great appetite and you are willing to eat and drink. Then there is a third stage when you start limiting motion, but you still walk. And then there's a fourth stage where you are almost recovered and you can walk and you can go around. Those 4 stages are very different in duration.
Tell me a little bit about the differences between this flight, living in space with just one other person, versus your previous experiences with larger crews, more visitors, etc.
It's a different experience, has some difficulties, has some advantages. I think it's more critical that it's the right person on the crew with a 2-person crew. You can get away with less carefully chosen or more randomness in the crew pick. You have a larger crew. When it becomes 1 or 2 people, it's very critical.
My experience shows, and actually it's my 4th mission, and it's the 3rd mission where we have only 2 crew members. I only had 1 3 crew member flight. I can tell you that a 2 crew member crew is a very simple crew, and both crew members are in the same and similar conditions. When we have more people, then you can build coalitions, so to speak, and kind of group and regroup, and psychologically it is more demanding. This is why I think that a 2 crew member crew is a very simple crew, and it's easier to psychologically. The more crew members we have, the more difficult it is.
Based on your experiences, as NASA is beginning the process of planning for missions to the Moon and Mars, what would you consider an optimal crew size for a mission like that?
I don't know. Obviously, it's limited by the life support systems that you're taking to Mars with you and intend to use on Mars to survive there. It can't be more than 3 to 5. As Sasha says, 2 persons doesn't have the coalitions, but I imagine a Mars crew will probably need some redundancy in the crew as well, to that extent. So you have to have a bigger crew than 2. So 3, 5, maybe 7.
Okay, thank you. Has the amount of time that you spend in microgravity now, did it make you any more comfortable on your spacewalk? How much correlation is there between everyday life in microgravity and an EVA?
Ну, я могу сказать, у меня нет опыта
Well, I don't have
выходов в открытый
experience on EVA
первые дни полета.
during the first stage of the flight. Probably Mike would be responding better to you about this. But I think that
В полете
the long stay on board the station, it does not impact your performance inside the spacesuit very much. Actually, it makes you more confident when you're preparing the station and the equipment for the spacewalk. However, the performance, your performance inside the suit outside in the outer space is not impacted, especially when you are already adjusted to being in space. Usually we run into some difficulties and some lack of coordination, some stiffness in limbs. Definitely it's a different media. However, it's not much different. Let me pass the mic to Mike.
The advantage you have of doing an EVA within a couple of days of being in space is, of course, you remember whatever they last told you before you lifted off. But they tell you an awful lot before you lift off, and a lot of that you forget anyway because it's so much. So the freshness of your most recent training is a little bit more apparent as early EVA missions. Once you get past a month or so, I think you get into an optimum period where you're nicely adapted to the space environment, and you can also be pretty easily reminded about the training that you have accomplished, not in the last days before liftoff, but in maybe the last month before liftoff. And so there you have a more gentle balance between recency of training and what you remember in a complex task, and then carrying it out when you're adapted in space.
All right. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but are there any preparations you made differently for this mission based on things you've learned on prior flights?
Not particularly, no. This is my 6th flight, and preparing for a flight in general is pretty much similar, whether it's long or short. That's not quite true. I certainly prepared better for this flight, activities or recreations or things that I wanted to accomplish during the flight on a personal level. Those sorts of things I didn't really consider for short flights.
Are there any things you're doing differently to prepare for your return to Earth based on prior flights?
Yes, actually. The whole vestibular head spinning and feeling nauseous after return to Earth is something that does afflict me sometimes, and it hasn't happened to me every time. And so out of the 5 flights so far, a number have been bad, a number have been good. I've listened to Sasha. He has a particular approach. I've actually ended up coming around to about the way Sasha's going to do it in the Soyuz, and I think I'm going to do it exactly the same way he does it. It's not quite the NASA orthodox method, but it worked for me once or twice before, and I'm going to settle on it.
I think that my previous landings were successful, so to speak, why should we improve the good thing? I will just do the same as I did before.
Other than the obvious radiation and physical atrophy factors, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges of living in space that have to be overcome before human missions can be sent to other worlds?
I think the appropriate use of the crew in servicing or staying busy on board the vehicle, the spacecraft, is a very, very important topic. You can be given tasks to keep you busy, but if they're sense to be just busy tasks. That will not work for the crew. The crew needs to be doing things that are useful, helpful to their own survival, to their own mission, but also not so incredibly suited towards earthbound activities that they become difficult to carry out or frustrating to carry out on board. I think this whole issue of crew activity is a very important one to get a good balance on for a long, long duration flight. The other thing we have to deal with is isolation. As you move away from the Earth, you don't have this beautiful object to look at sometimes. And so as you just are hanging in the blackness, the black void of space with the bright sun out there with nothing else to look at for many, many months, that also is going to have an effect on the crew. So again, the activities within the spacecraft are very important to develop.
I believe that the psychological aspect is the fact that we are away from Earth. We are children of the Earth. It's our mother. And as small children, we are very comfortable close to the Earth. And it can protect us. It can help us in a difficult moment. When we are far away from it, we are like teenagers and grown-ups. We are going away from our mother and learning how to be on our own. This is why I think that psychologically it will be very difficult. Later on, we will get used to it.
Gentlemen, what are you most proud of from your Expedition 8 mission?
That's a dangerous question, but, without having any wood to touch here, I would say just not really breaking anything so far.
I think that the main result we can be proud of in our mission, we have proven that even a two-crew member crew can function well on board the station and do everything we need to do, including EVA. Everybody has been witness to that, and we can move forward.
What advice would you have for a rookie astronaut about to begin an increment on Alpha?
Who would that be? Now, obviously, we think about that very seriously, and there are a number of things to give advice on. Because of if you're talking about the handover activity in particular, that's what I'm thinking about. That's the task that's in front of me. We need to discuss very carefully how to get a person off to a running start. Tell them the things they need to know to get their days working in the first weeks. To that extent, it's where to find the food. It's how to go to the bathroom. It's what to do with the laundry. It's how to set up your sleeping bag. It's how do you wash? What do you do to wash without taking an hour over it? Those sorts of things I'm going to spend time on absolutely up front with rookies. Once you get past that, then you get into the whole business of the technical side, which is where the systems are, etc., and how they're arranged and what you do. But basically, living, moving are the things I'm going to teach, and so you don't lose things. There's a certain habit and discipline pattern you have to develop in space that you be black about on Earth, about where you put things, putting things down or not, things floating away, losing things. So that's stuff I hand over first, get people started.
Now that you've been on Alpha for a while, how would you compare the station with Mir?
In something, the station is very similar. Some things are very different. There are pluses and minuses, pros and contras. I used to see the differences during my first days, and those differences were very acute. Sometimes we can see the negative things here, some living discomforts, and sometimes we miss those modules we were supposed to have in the beginning. Anyways, unfortunately, not all the modifications were successful, and some things, especially in terms of living on board the station, were not ergonomically optimal. However, we are not discouraged by that. In general, the station commanding is very different from the Mir. Communication options are different. The living parameters are different. If I was feeling very special in terms of communications on Mir, now I feel that I'm just away on a business trip. And unless we were in the microgravity, I would just feel that I'm far away from home, but not in a unique place.
For me, of course, the huge difference is the presence of the United States segment, and it's a pretty remarkable achievement. The lab module here with all the equipment, already there's a history behind these panels and walls of so many bits of equipment and experiments, many of which I haven't actually touched and put my hands on. The work that's done before us is quite present as you go through the station doing your daily activities, and I didn't have that feeling, certainly of U.S. presence, of course, on Mir so much, although there were some U.S. experiments in the Spectre and Corona modules. The Russian segment, to me, does feel similar to Mir, but as Sasha says, there are differences, although I don't see them as being too significantly different.
Gentlemen, I thank you both for giving me your time this morning. You've been very informative, and I really appreciate your help. Dr. Foale, I look forward to meeting you during your crew visit to Marshall, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Well, Dave, thank you very much. These are very thought-provoking questions. We both remarked to each other how good these questions were. And we could have given you a lot much fuller answers, but we know you didn't have the time.
Alpha, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event.
And this is Mission Control in Houston. Thank you, Mr. Hitt, with NASAExplorers.com. Mike and Alexander on Alpha, we're resuming operational space-to-ground communications.